What if I told you that the person who keeps pulling away isn't afraid of love at all? They're not running because they don't care. They're not distant because they feel nothing. In fact, the truth is far more painful. The avoidant isn't afraid of losing a relationship. They're afraid of losing the one person who saw through every wall, every defense, every excuse, and loved them anyway. Because when a super empath walks away, something changes. The avoidant can replace attention. They can replace distractions. They can even replace relationships. But they can never replace the rare soul who understood them without judgment and stayed when everyone else left. And that's the loss they never saw coming. There is a common belief that avoidant people fear commitment, fear intimacy, or fear love itself. But if you've ever loved an avoidant deeply, you've probably noticed something strange. The closer the connection becomes, the more they retreat. The more genuine the love becomes, the more uncomfortable they seem. It creates a painful question. If they loved me, why did they pull away? The answer is not as simple as a lack of feelings. Many avoidants desperately want connection. They crave understanding. They long for someone who truly sees them. But deep down, they fear the vulnerability that real love requires. And when a super empath enters their life, that fear becomes impossible to ignore. Because a super empath doesn't just love the polished version. They love the wounded version. The insecure version. The version hidden behind years of emotional armor. That level of connection is beautiful. But for someone who has spent a lifetime protecting themselves, it can also feel terrifying. And that's why the greatest fear is not love itself. The greatest fear is losing the one person who made them feel safe enough to experience it. Most people move through relationships looking for what is obvious. They notice confidence, success, appearance, charm, and the qualities that are easy to recognize. But a super empath operates differently. They pay attention to what exists beneath the surface. They listen to what is not being said. They notice the hesitation in someone's voice, the sadness hidden behind a smile, and the emotional wounds concealed beneath a strong exterior. While others may judge someone's behavior at face value, the super empath instinctively searches for the deeper story. This is what makes their connection with an avoidant so unique. An avoidant often spends years mastering the art of self-protection. They learn how to keep people at a comfortable distance. They become skilled at revealing only enough of themselves to maintain relationships while keeping their deepest fears hidden. To the outside world, they may appear independent, detached, or emotionally unavailable. Most people eventually accept that image and stop looking any deeper. But the super empath doesn't. The super empath senses that there is more beneath the walls. They recognize that the coldness is often covering fear. The distance is often protecting vulnerability. The silence is often carrying emotions that have never been properly expressed. Instead of reacting only to what they see, they become curious about what they cannot see. They understand that people who seem the hardest to reach are often carrying the heaviest burdens. This ability to see beyond appearances creates a powerful bond. For perhaps the first time in their life, the avoidant feels noticed in a way that goes beyond their achievements, personality, or public image. Someone is paying attention to the parts of them they work so hard to hide. Someone is recognizing their pain without forcing them to explain it. Someone is offering understanding instead of judgment. That experience can feel both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because every human being wants to be understood. Unsettling because being truly seen removes the safety of hiding. The avoidant may find themselves drawn toward the empath while simultaneously feeling an urge to pull away. They are attracted to the connection because it provides something they have always wanted, yet they fear it because it threatens the emotional defenses that have protected them for so long. What makes the super empath so unforgettable is not simply their kindness. It is their ability to recognize value where others see flaws. They see strength hidden inside insecurity. They see potential hidden inside fear. They see a wounded heart where others see difficult behavior. While many people focus on what is wrong, the super empath focuses on what is possible. And for someone who has spent years feeling misunderstood, that kind of recognition can leave a lasting mark that is impossible to forget. Most people assume that rejection is the greatest fear in relationships. They believe that losing someone, being abandoned, or hearing the word no is what creates the deepest emotional pain. But for many avoidants, the real fear runs much deeper than rejection. What truly unsettles them is vulnerability. Rejection may hurt, but vulnerability requires something far more difficult. It requires lowering the walls, exposing the heart, and allowing another person to see the parts of themselves they have spent years protecting. For an avoidant, emotional walls were not built overnight. They were often created through experiences that taught them it was safer to depend on themselves than to trust others completely. Over time, independence became more than a personality trait. It became a survival strategy. Keeping emotions under control felt safer than expressing them. Maintaining distance felt safer than risking disappointment. Protecting themselves became second nature. This is why relationships can become so complicated for them. On one hand, they desire connection like everyone else. They want companionship, understanding, and love. They want someone who accepts them and makes them feel valued. But on the other hand, every step toward deeper intimacy challenges the emotional defenses they have relied on for years. The closer someone gets, the more exposed they feel. A super empath naturally encourages emotional closeness. They ask meaningful questions. They create a safe environment where honesty can exist. They don't settle for surface-level conversations when they sense there is something deeper waiting to be discovered. Their presence invites authenticity, and that invitation can feel overwhelming to an avoidant. As the connection grows stronger, the avoidant may begin to experience an internal conflict. Part of them feels drawn toward the warmth and acceptance being offered. Another part of them feels the urge to retreat. They may start pulling away after moments of intimacy. They may become distant after meaningful conversations. They may create space right when the relationship seems to be progressing. To the empath, this behavior can feel confusing and contradictory. But for the avoidant, it is often an automatic response to feeling emotionally exposed. What makes vulnerability so difficult is that it removes certainty. It requires trust without guarantees. It means allowing another person to hold pieces of your heart that could potentially be hurt. For someone accustomed to self-protection, that level of openness can feel terrifying. It forces them to confront fears they would rather avoid, fears of disappointment, betrayal, inadequacy, and emotional dependence. The tragedy is that the very connection they crave is often hidden behind the door they are afraid to open. Every act of vulnerability brings them closer to the intimacy they desire, yet it also brings them face to face with the fears they have spent years trying to escape. That tension creates the push and pull dynamic that so often defines their relationships. One of the most powerful things a super empath brings into a relationship is emotional safety. Not the kind of safety that comes from promises or words alone, but the kind that is felt. It is the quiet reassurance that someone can be honest without being judged. It is the feeling that mistakes will not automatically lead to abandonment. It is knowing that difficult emotions can be expressed without turning into a battle. For many avoidants, this type of emotional environment is unfamiliar, and that is exactly why it becomes so significant. The super empath has a unique ability to make people feel accepted. They do not rush to criticize every flaw or react harshly to every imperfection. Instead, they approach others with patience, curiosity, and understanding. When an avoidant struggles to express themselves, the empath often remains present. When they withdraw, the empath tries to understand rather than immediately condemn. When emotional walls appear, the empath sees them as signs of fear rather than proof of indifference. Over time, this creates a dynamic that becomes deeply meaningful. The avoidant may not openly admit how much the relationship matters, but internally something important is happening. They begin to experience a level of emotional comfort they rarely allow themselves to feel. They know that this person listens differently. They know that this person sees beyond appearances. They know that this person is willing to stay present during moments when others might walk away. What makes this especially powerful is that the super empath often provides something the avoidant did not realize they needed. The avoidant may pride themselves on independence. They may tell themselves they do not need anyone. They may appear completely self-sufficient to the outside world. Yet beneath that image is the same human desire for connection that exists in everyone. The difference is that they have become accustomed to suppressing it. As the bond deepens, the empath gradually becomes a place of emotional refuge. After a difficult day, they are the person whose presence feels calming. During moments of stress, they are the person who brings comfort. When self-doubt appears, they are often the voice offering encouragement and perspective. The avoidant may never say these things directly, but they begin to rely on the emotional stability the empath provides. This reliance is often subtle. It does not always look like dependence in the traditional sense. Instead, it appears through habits, routines, and emotional patterns. The avoidant starts seeking reassurance from the empath's presence. They feel more grounded when communication is consistent. They feel a sense of relief knowing there is someone who understands them without requiring constant explanations. Even when they maintain their independent image, the connection becomes woven into their emotional life. The paradox is that they may continue acting as though they need less from the relationship than they actually do. While the empath openly invests emotionally, the avoidant often hides the depth of their attachment. Yet beneath the surface, the relationship has become a source of security that is far more valuable than they are willing to acknowledge. One of the most painful realities of human nature is that people do not always recognize the value of something while they still have it. Familiarity can create blindness. What once felt extraordinary slowly becomes expected. The daily acts of patience, understanding, and support become part of the background, no longer receiving the appreciation they deserve. This dynamic is especially common in relationships between avoidants and super empaths. The super empath often gives more than people realize. They invest emotional energy, offer encouragement during difficult moments, and continue believing in someone even when that person struggles to believe in themselves. They are often the ones initiating difficult conversations, repairing emotional distance, and maintaining the connection when challenges arise. Because they care deeply, they frequently continue showing up even when the effort is not fully reciprocated. For the avoidant, this consistency can become something they quietly depend on. The empath's presence starts to feel permanent. Their patience feels endless. Their understanding feels guaranteed. As a result, the avoidant may stop recognizing how rare those qualities truly are. They become accustomed to having someone who always tries to understand their perspective, someone who continues offering compassion when others would have already walked away. At the same time, the avoidant's focus is often directed toward preserving their independence and managing their discomfort with intimacy. They may become preoccupied with maintaining space, avoiding emotional pressure, or protecting themselves from vulnerability. In doing so, they can lose sight of the value standing directly in front of them. The empath's love becomes something they assume will always be available. But there comes a point when even the strongest empath reaches their limit. Being understanding does not mean having unlimited endurance. Being compassionate does not mean accepting endless emotional distance. Eventually, the empath realizes that love cannot survive on one person's effort alone. They recognize that constantly chasing connection while receiving inconsistency in return is draining their emotional well-being. When the empath finally steps away, the reality of the loss begins to emerge. At first, the avoidant may convince themselves that they are fine. They may rely on the same coping mechanisms that have always helped them manage emotional conflict. They distract themselves with work, routines, social activities, or new experiences. They tell themselves that life will continue as normal, yet over time something starts to feel different. The messages that once brought comfort are gone. The understanding that once felt automatic is no longer available. The person who consistently created emotional safety is no longer there to soften difficult moments. Gradually, the avoidant begins noticing the absence in ways they never expected. What they miss is often not just the relationship itself. They miss the feeling of being deeply understood. They miss the patience they once received without earning it. They miss the rare experience of having someone who could see both their strengths and flaws, and still choose to stay. The qualities that once seemed ordinary suddenly reveal themselves as extraordinary, and the connection they once resisted becomes the connection they can no longer replace. There are moments in life that force a person to confront truths they have spent years avoiding. For many avoidants, losing a super empath becomes one of those moments. While the relationship exists, it is often possible to focus on distractions, rationalizations, or explanations that make uncomfortable emotions easier to manage. They can tell themselves that they simply need more space, that timing is not right, or that the relationship was not as significant as it seemed. These explanations may provide temporary comfort, but they rarely survive the reality of genuine loss. When the super empath leaves, the emotional landscape changes. The familiar source of understanding is no longer available. The person who consistently offered patience, support, and acceptance is gone. Suddenly, there is no one bridging the emotional distance, no one initiating the difficult conversations, no one quietly carrying the weight of maintaining the connection. What remains is silence, and within that silence, self-reflection often begins. At first, the avoidant may resist it. Looking inward can feel uncomfortable, because it requires confronting patterns that have existed for years. It means examining how fear influenced decisions. It means acknowledging moments when vulnerability was avoided, opportunities for connection were missed, and emotional walls were prioritized over intimacy. These realizations are not easy, because they challenge the protective narratives that have been carefully maintained. The super empath's absence often becomes a mirror. Without intending to, they leave behind a reflection of what the relationship truly offered. The avoidant begins comparing new interactions to the depth of understanding they once experienced. They notice how difficult it is to find someone who listened with genuine care. They realize that emotional safety is far rarer than they once believed. What was previously taken for granted now stands out with remarkable clarity. This period of reflection can become a turning point. Some avoidants begin asking questions they have never seriously considered before. Why does closeness feel threatening? Why does vulnerability create discomfort? Why is it easier to retreat than to communicate honestly? These questions open doors to self-awareness that may have remained closed for years. The pain of loss becomes a teacher, revealing lessons that comfort and routine could never provide. Growth rarely begins with certainty. It often begins with discomfort. The avoidant may start recognizing that the emotional walls that once felt protective have also been limiting. The very defenses designed to prevent pain have prevented deeper connection as well. They begin to see that avoiding vulnerability did not eliminate risk. It simply created different consequences. For some, this realization inspires meaningful change. They become more willing to communicate openly, express emotions honestly, and remain present during uncomfortable moments. They start understanding that true connection requires courage rather than control. The loss of the super empath becomes more than an ending. It becomes an experience that exposes hidden fears, reveals long-standing patterns, and challenges them to become a version of themselves they never thought possible. As we come to the end of this conversation, there is one truth that stands above everything else. Avoidants do not always fear love. What they often fear is what love requires. They fear vulnerability. They fear exposure. They fear the possibility of depending on someone so deeply that losing them would hurt beyond words. And that is why the super empath becomes such a powerful presence in their life. The super empath sees what others overlook. They understand what others misunderstand. They offer patience when others walk away. They create safety where fear once existed. They become a rare reminder that genuine connection is still possible. But no matter how much love a super empath has to give, they cannot do the emotional work for someone else. They cannot heal wounds that another person refuses to face. They cannot build a relationship alone. Love can inspire growth, but growth remains a personal choice. Sometimes the avoidant recognizes the value of that connection while it still exists. Sometimes they find the courage to lower their walls and meet love with openness. And when that happens, extraordinary relationships can be built. But sometimes the realization comes later. Sometimes it arrives in the silence after the messages stop. Sometimes it arrives when the comfort, understanding, and emotional safety they once relied on are no longer there. And that is when they discover a lesson that many people learn too late. Not every person who enters your life is replaceable. Some people leave an imprint on your heart because they saw you in ways no one else ever did. The super empath is often one of those people. So if you are the empath, remember this. Your value is not determined by someone's ability to recognize it. Your kindness is not weakness. Your compassion is not something to apologize for. Never lose yourself trying to save someone who is unwilling to save themselves. And if you are the avoidant, understand this. The walls that protect your heart can also become the barriers that keep love out. The greatest risk is not always opening your heart. Sometimes the greatest risk is waiting too long to do it, because one day, the person who kept choosing you may stop choosing. And when they do, you may finally understand just how rare they truly were. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on the relationships in your life and the people who have shown you genuine love, patience, and understanding. Thank you for spending your time here today. Your support, your presence, and your willingness to grow mean more than you know. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who may need to hear this message right now. Until next time, protect your peace, know your worth, and never settle for a connection that asks you to abandon yourself. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.